Hello, I'm Doreen Ellen Bell Douton. Most people have long since been replaced by artificial intelligence. By that, I do not mean that their jobs have been overtaken by robots, although I recognize that danger exists as well. By the term intelligence, I mean intelligence in the sense of the way intelligence agencies use that, meaning information. Information that we hold that can give a certain amount of power. And if it is manipulated, if it is distorted, if it is artificial, can give someone else an advantage over us. So I think it's important because those who manipulate people's minds want them to think that artificial intelligence is primarily about the use of computers and robots. It's really not. The main program of artificial intelligence is supplying people with misinformation, disinformation, partial information, most of which is emotionally charged, and therefore sparks people to consider those ideas, talk about those ideas, argue about those ideas, emote about those ideas, that information, some of which probably never even happened. Many of the memories that people think they have are entirely synthetic. They never happened. Most of the issues that people take issue with and which supply their identity, I'm a leftist, I'm a rightist, I'm a thisist, I'm a thatist, are purely artificial. They were made up in a think tank somewhere, and if you take any position on them, you have become artificial intelligence. Most people are artificial intelligence. That is the primary driver behind how they think, speak, act, believe, who they choose to ally with, and so forth and so on, is based entirely on events that didn't happen. Maybe to say entirely is an exaggeration. Most people are kind of like cyborgs. They still have some measure of natural human intelligence, but their identity is synthetic. If someone, be they Jew or Gentile, believes that the perfection of their world is going to come about as a result of someone else suddenly appearing on the scene, if you have outsourced the perfection of your world, some might call it salvation, to some imaginary someone else, you have already tagged yourself as some kind of a blithering idiot and easy prey. You have tagged yourself on the internet as easy pickings. In accordance with what they know, you are emotionally charged by. You will be supplied on the net with factoids, news items, opinions, discussions, problems, events, none of which, if they happened at all, are being delivered to you accurately, but it is pointed toward you in order to get you going. They're winding you up like a doll, and then they watch you walk around, and that is artificial intelligence. It is far more important that the ideas that we entertain are worthwhile ideas than that they are factually true. I'm going to say that again because I know that that flies in the face of everything you've been told. It is more important that an idea that you entertain is worthwhile entertaining than that it is factually true. The more physicists look at the universe, the more they come to the conclusion that it doesn't exist. It is almost impossible to absolutely, with complete certainty, determine that something is true. But we can most definitely determine that an idea is worthwhile. And that depends on our moral structure. The idea of peace on earth, the idea of everyone having what they need, the idea of having an eternal body is not true, but it is an idea worth thinking about. It is a principle worth applying one's self to. More important than whether or not the ideas that we entertain are true is the development of the character traits and the wisdom that will allow us to be able to know what ideas are worth entertaining and which are not. One of the problems with the Talmud is that when the Jews who were run out of Eretz Yisrael, out of the land of Israel, because they could not live according to the exacting moral standards of the judges and the prophets, found themselves in Babel, in Babylon, and in other places, but I'm talking about Babylon specifically, where the big academies were set up. There, they found themselves in a world in which they could entertain any and every idea without the moral constraints, without the moral suggestions and demands of the judges and the prophets. And so what did they come about thinking? Whether or not one can use an elephant as the side of their sukkah and so forth and so on, they began to allow their minds to run freely, but they didn't have the moral structure, the moral basis upon which to allow one's imagination to run freely and do it wisely and well. What the judges and the prophets were doing was they were laying the moral foundation upon which one can go to the smorgasbord of ideas and know what to pick. To know not to pick the candies and the cheesecakes, and they may be immediately appealing, but ultimately they will make you ill. To know that when you go to a smorgasbord, at least fill up on the nutritious food, and then if you have a little room left over for a little piece of cheesecake or whatever it is, preferably vegan, it won't hurt you because it's not most of what you're eating. Most of what you're eating has been the fruits and the vegetables. You got the good stuff in. So what happened was the rabbis find themselves in Babylon. They are no longer what they consider to be encumbered by the moral demands of the judges and the prophets, and their minds begin to wander. And they got themselves into all kinds of trouble because they were not wise. They were very intelligent, very intellectually creative, but not very moral. And so you get yourself into trouble if you don't have that moral ballast. When someone has thoroughly inculcated themselves with the ideas that lead to wisdom, they're in a position then, and only then, to decide whether or not ideas are worth entertaining or not, whether or not they will pan out into something that we want to live with. My job in this world is to, insofar as I am able, return to the moral basis of Judaism, where from we can then begin to entertain ideas correctly, wisely, and well, and undo the Babylonian damage that the rabbis did. They were kicked out of Israel because they couldn't hack it morally. And all of the ideas that they came up with have to be re-examined, because a lot of those ideas is just foolishness. Some of it is worthwhile, but a lot of it is foolishness. So in order to know how to think, one first has to go about being wise. There are two traditions that I am deeply impressed with. They're not my path. My path, again, is to return to the original Judaism, and Hashem has given me the requisite characteristics and skill set that I need to do that, so that's my work. But I'm talking about for others who are not Jewish. The two traditions that I find the most impressive are that of the Stoics and the Buddhists. In both of those traditions, one is first taught how to discipline their emotions and their minds such that they can then think correctly, know how to choose correctly, know how to choose wisely and well, know what to think about, know what to apply themselves to. I'm very impressed by both Stoicism and Buddhism, and it would seem to me that there must have been a trade route between the East and Europe, because some of the ideas of Stoicism are so like those of Buddhism that, I mean, it's possible that the ideas arose independently, but it looks to me like there was a shared tradition there, and I would recommend it. One of the things that I heard said, I was listening to a discussion by a Buddhist monk, a man probably about 70-ish at the time that he said this. He said, when I first arrived at the temple as a young child, I thought that the statues were the Buddha. And I would kneel down to the statues and I would address them as though it was the Buddha. And then he said, as I grew older and I learned more, I began to say to myself, all of these wonderful teachings that I'm hearing, that must be the real Buddha. It's not so much, Buddha isn't a statue anymore. Buddha now becomes the ideas. He said, as I progressed, I began to realize I am the Buddha. And when I heard that, I said to myself, this guy's got it. Jews don't bow down to statues, I hope. But I have never, except for me, heard any Jew who came to the realization that they are Havaya. And if they did, they certainly didn't have the courage to admit it. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. That they never get to the point of realizing that it's their consciousness that's writing the Torah. That they are Havaya. And they are that which is even above the level of Havaya, that is bringing Havaya into existence. I've never met another Jew who got to that level. So we have a Buddhist who gets to the point, from the point of thinking that the Buddha is a statue to realizing that he is the Buddha. But the Jews never got to that level. And if any did, they didn't have the courage to be able to confront the rabbis with that truth. It's specifically because, having heard this Buddhist monk, I know that in Buddhism one can eventually arrive at the understanding of their own divinity and be able to reconcile that with the imperfection of their human existence and not be carried away on a craze of megalomania, in which they think that I'm the one and the only one, that they understand that others arrive at that level too, and don't see a contradiction in that I direct people who are not Jews to Buddhism. I cannot, in good conscience, direct people to Rabbinic Judaism, because it is not true Judaism. And my work in Judaism is trying to help people to return to the original path, in which they come to know that when they say that God is one, they take that most literally and don't exclude themselves from that, but at the same time not try to take over others, to leave space for others being God too, and knowing that that's not polytheism, that's monotheism at its highest level. I also direct people to the Stoic tradition. I think that it is most suitable for a lot of Europeans and the way the European mind works. I think that they came to the highest practice of disciplining the mind and the emotions that Europeans desperately need in order to be able to advance and be able to get their megalomania under control, their idea that they have to convert others, proselytize to others, bring others to civilization. All of those are signs of extreme moral and emotional and intellectual pathology. Stoicism helps with that, I think. Marcus Aurelius was also a famous Stoic in addition to being an emperor, and he was a very good emperor because he was a Stoic. He didn't become a Caligula because he was a Stoic. Yeah, he didn't become a Nero because he was a Stoic. So Stoicism is definitely a philosophy that allows one to reach a position of considerable influence without going off half-cocked and treading on others. That's real intelligence, as opposed to artificial intelligence. Until we have undertaken some kind of a practice that brings our thoughts and emotions under control, until we can reach a level where we're able to objectively look at ideas without falling into them, to be able to stand back and observe a particular way of thinking and determine whether or not that's a worthwhile way of thinking, rather than just sort of falling into the river of the idea, getting carried away with it. We are subject to artificial intelligence. That is to say, to have our thoughts and emotions and what we think is important directed externally. We are incredibly vulnerable to external influence if we come from a tradition of outsourcing our ultimate salvation to someone else. And the Jews are very definitely guilty of that, though the Jews in the rabbinic tradition, which is the vast majority. And certainly the Christians took it, I think, to the most extreme. And that basically puts a target on their back for those who know that these people have already been entrained to externalizing the hope of them finding peace to someone else. So everybody that can step in and make them promises has a good chance of making them dependent on them. I hope that this discussion has been of help to you, helping you to understand that the mind and the emotions have to be consciously brought under control. We cannot presume, no matter how intelligent we are, that without training the mind and the emotions that we can come to the right ideas. You have somebody like an Elon Musk, who he's all over the map. He's very intelligent, but he's getting a lot not done. I think that he's pretty much a typical Western man in that sense. He's got ideas that are so grandiose, that he fell in love with them, thinking that he's some kind of a genius, and he can't get any of it done. He owes $56 billion here and $44 billion there, you know. And, it's not an example of what we want to be when we grow up, I hope. It's certainly okay to entertain ideas just for the fun of it, so long as we don't take them too seriously. I watch videos of, of physics and so forth and so on, not because I think that they have any kind of handle on what's going on in the universe. I'm entirely sure that they don't. But what they think they see gives a lot of information about how their minds work. So we have to get to a point where we can look at an idea, and rather than being enchanted by the idea itself, you look at the idea and say to yourself, is this an idea worth adopting or not? If not, you can then say to yourself, well, why would somebody have come up with an idea like this? What thinking goes behind it? What emotional makeup goes into it? And get an idea of how ideas that are not worthwhile are generated. So we have to be able to rise above what is being suggested to us and what is being demanded of us, and look at that idea and be able to say, that's worthwhile, that's not an ultimately worthwhile idea, but it's kind of fun to play with it, but not to fall into these ideas, not to build our identity on them. Not to say I'm a conservative, I'm a leftist, I'm a thisist, I'm a thatist. The minute that we try to hang our identity on some kind of a thought set, we come to a false ego. You know, it's interesting, the English word self, I think, is an etymon of the Hebrew shoresh samech lamed pei, salaf, which means distortion. That's what salaf means, is distortion. It's okay to entertain ideas. It's very dangerous to build our identity on them. Thank you for listening.